This is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Welcome into another 3-Mall Pod bonus edition. I'm Cole Manbeck, joined as always by former K-State wide receiver Curry Sexton and partner at Wildcat NIL, and we are here to talk about Kansas State's dominating 42-13 victory over Troy, one of the better Group of 5 opponents that is out there in the country, and a game that Kansas State and Kansas State fans were a little bit concerned about going in, as K-State has lost a couple games to Group of 5 teams over the last 3 years, but K-State controls this one. Got a little tight at one point in that game, but quickly K-State, with a touchdown right before the end of the first half, stretched that lead out and took it from there. And so Curry, I mean, look, K-State was 14.5-point favorites according to Vegas, and they end up winning the game by 29. A lot of the advanced analytics had K-State. I think Bill Connolly at ESPN, his SP Plus, had him winning by around 19. Kelly Ford, another advanced analytics college football guy, had him around like 14 or 15, I want to say. And they win it by 29 against a team that's the preseason pick to win the Sun Belt, finished ranked 19th in the country last year, returned 14 starters overall, and won 12 games last year, and had the second longest winning streak in the country, only behind Georgia, going into that game. Last time they lost a game was on a Hail Mary against App State on September 17th, 2022. So taking all those things into consideration, how do you kind of grade what you saw on Saturday in K-State's win?
I think it was an excellent win for all the reasons that you just stated. I mean, I think that game, I felt like going into it, there was a little bit of there was too much comfortability within the K-State fan base, especially after what happened last year with Tulane and what happened prior with Arkansas State. That was a really, really good football team. Like you said, had they not lost on that Hail Mary against App State, that's a team that very well could have been in competition with Tulane for that New Year's Six Bowl. I mean, that is Troy is a very, very good football team with some obvious talent, as we saw on Saturday. And so was just thoroughly impressed with the performance, especially the performance of the defense, and the resiliency of the team. You get up big early, you think, okay, we're going to coast to a victory here. Troy fights back, and then we put the pedal to the metal and really, really had an impressive end of that second quarter and then second half. And so really just very, very impressed with the product that we put on the field on Saturday.
Let's start with the defense, because once again, just like week one, that was my biggest takeaway, is just how dominant that defensive performance was. Again, from a group that was 105th in the country in returning defensive production, 0 returning starts at the cornerback position, yet Jacob Parrish and Will Lee were a dynamite duo out there on Saturday, and what they put on the field. In fact, Pro Football Focus graded them as K-State's 2 top defenders on the entire unit on Saturday. Maybe let's just start there with what those guys were able to do defensively, Parrish and Lee.
Yeah, just very, very impressive. I think one thing that I noticed that maybe I didn't notice it in the first game. I don't know that they did it in the first game, but they were flipping. Jacob almost played exclusively to the field, and Will played almost exclusively to the boundary. So if the ball switched hash marks, they'd flip sides of the field, which I think plays to their strengths. And Will's a little bit longer, a little bit rangier, maybe a little bit more physical in the run game. And then Jacob's obviously the speed demon, got elite coverage skills. And so I think it was interesting for me to see that development Saturday and to watch those guys play those roles really, really well. Obviously, we've seen Jacob perform at a really, really high level whenever he's had opportunities. So continuing to see that is becoming less and less of a surprise. I mean, I kept commenting to my dad Saturday. I just said, if they throw it to Jacob, he is always he's glued to his guy, to the point you're like, is he going to start getting holding calls or interference calls? But his coverage is that tight. I know it was awesome to see Will, have the game that he did. I have to say, Will being a little bit a slighter build for a taller corner, didn't know that he had the capabilities that he showed Saturday to really be a force in the run game. And so fun to see him stick his nose in the middle of things several times, and then obviously make that big pick. So really, just pleased with what we have with those two guys. And I think ultimately on the defensive side, I think I mentioned this last week, but Joe Kleinerman doesn't get enough credit for what he does. To year after year with the turnover that we have on a year-to-year basis, and the turnover that we had from last year to this year with star power and to be able to show what we've shown over the first 2 weeks is pretty unbelievable.
You hit on something I was going to ask you about, Curry, because Joe Klanderman, and we'll talk more a little bit about Parrish and Lee and what they did on Saturday and some of the things that really stood out. But Joe Klanderman, let's take the COVID season out of 2020. That was out of whack. That was his first year on the job. And we know tons of guys were missing game in and game out. There's just nothing there to take from that. If you look at the 2021 season and you look at like the F+ rankings, which are Bill Connolly's SP+, and then Brian Freemow and other advanced analytics guys, FEI ratings. So those advanced analytics, you combine them together. K-State's defense was 25th in the country in 2021. They ranked 20th in the country according to the F+ last year. They currently rank 17th in the F+ this year. I mean, 3 straight years that they are fielding, and we're only 2 games in this year, but they certainly look on track. Three straight seasons of top 25 looking defenses out there, despite all of the turnover. I mean, Joe Klanderman seems like a budding star and maybe somebody that we just overlook. I'm guilty of a little bit because Colin Klein and, you know, the folklore of Colin and everything he did. We love Colin, but it does seem like Klanderman has been a little overlooked.
Absolutely. And I think, unlike Colin, who's got that star power because of the player that he was and now the coach that he is, you know, Klanderman is a lesser known, I guess you could say. And he's not a guy that when he gets in front of the media, you know, he's maybe not the biggest talker in the world. So, you know, he's not generating press clips and headlines and things of that nature. He just shows up to work and does his job at a really, really high level. And just seeing what he's done with some of those secondary pieces. I mean, you think about, you know, Josh Hayes last year. Hayes, you know, bounced from North Dakota State to Virginia and then to K-State, played corner, played safety, played that nickel position, was kind of a guy that nobody really had high expectations for coming into last year because he hadn't really ever produced at a high level. And then he comes in, performs at an extremely high level, and then gets drafted. And I think you know, we've only caught a glimpse of Marquise Siegel so far, but I think you see some of those similarities with him. You know, played at North Dakota State, a lot of corner position, moving him down to that safety position. He looked like a natural on Saturday. And I think it just goes to show what kind of coach Joe Klanderman is and how he puts guys in the best position. I mean, Jordan Wright and Colby McAllister are other examples of that. These are guys who are pretty undersized. You know, their traditional spot is that quarterback spot. Coach Klanderman saw a need at safety and put those guys in there, and now they're serving in key secondary roles there. And so I think his ability to utilize his personnel and to also to take his personnel and fit it to positions that make the most sense for their skill sets is just really impressive. I don't know that I've seen a coach do something like that at K-State as much as he has and as well as he has.
They've had a ton of success in the secondary, especially in the transfer portal. You just hit on it, and they've told us before, Chris Kleiman has at Big 12 Media Days, they think Siegel could be the next transfer that plays on Sundays. He shows his versatility that can play, you know, from the kind of be that Josh Hayes type that can go down, play corner, play in the slot, and also slide back to safety. He looked great in run support, made a couple really nice tackles early in that game. Look, Julius Brents obviously had the size and physicality, and you knew that the potential was there. He turns into a second-round pick. He hadn't really done much at Iowa, partially due to injury, and then he comes in here, turns into a second-rounder. Hayes becomes a 5th. Russ Yeast, transferring in from Louisville at safety, he gets drafted, you know, made it to an NFL roster. I mean, they just continue to have success, and it looks like they might have a couple more NFL corners on the way. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but Jacob Parrish on Saturday targeted 11 times. They completed 4 balls for 20 yards on it. It's an average of 1.8 yards per pass targeted against Parrish. He's right now graded, I think Pro Football Focus has him as like a top 10 corner in terms of their grades in the country. 5 yards of completion allowed by him. But the thing, we know Parrish already, like he's got elite coverage skills, and we talked about him quite a bit. But Will Lee, Curry, you already hit on it a little bit. One of the things that I noticed, and I was sitting next to John Kurtz on the 3-Mile Pod at the game, is, and this probably hits on what you were mentioning earlier, but there were some times where he was just lined up in run support over like the tight end and didn't have a receiver over on that side of the field. And he was in the backfield constantly making plays. He ends up with 1.5 tackles for loss. He co-leads the team with 6 tackles. But he really showed something with his ability to play physical, and that was something Julius Brents was really good at. Brents was a physical corner that was good in run support, And it looks like Will Lee might be a guy that can do that too.
Yeah, absolutely, which is a huge asset. And I think obviously Brent's looked the part. I mean, Brent's looked more like a linebacker than he did at corner. So to see him get physical wasn't a surprise to anybody. Will Lee has a similar, he's of similar height, but not the same build. I mean, he's much, more slightly built, but obviously showed us on Saturday that he's willing to stick his nose in the middle of things. And I think by way of him kind of becoming that boundary corner, you're going to see him come off the edge a lot more, especially when you play against a team like Troy, where they get into those closed formations. Maybe, they kept putting to the boundary, they kept putting just a tight end and then the receivers to the field. And that's those situations obviously set themselves up to bring pressure with that corner. And Will showed that he's capable of being physical, and that he's also got some natural pass rushing ability. And there was one series in the second quarter where he made a couple plays at the line of scrimmage and then almost got to the quarterback for a sack. He was in the backfield so much that he had to come out for a snap or two during the middle of the series just to take a breather, which isn't something you typically see from corners because they're just manning their island out there. But he was so active out there that they had to pull him off for a couple snaps, which is something that really impressed upon me.
He actually, Curry, graded, according to PFF, as the #1 pass rusher for K-State on Saturday against Troy. And it makes sense. I mean, obviously, Khalid Duke was great. Brendan Mott was the second best pass rusher in terms of grades. Khalid was third. They all got after it, but Will Lee was living in the backfield and nearly got home on a couple of other sacks as well. Will Lee is going to be our player spotlight guest on this week's 3-Mall Pod through our collaboration with Curry, Wildcat NIL, and Riverbank Brewing in Council Grove. So we can't wait to have him on. He's a guy that was once committed to Oregon State, and we'll talk to him about his story, and then blows up at the junior college national title game last year and ends up reportedly with an Alabama offer and several others, but stuck with K-State. So we'll talk to Will Lee about that on this week's pod. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the K-State defense when we come back from break with Curry. But right now, we're going to tell you about our friends at Home Field Apparel. Once again, they've done 2 tremendous K-State drops of apparel over the last few months. They did a recent drop in early August with about 10 or 11 new K-State items. Retro gear, retro logos. If that's your style, it is for me. You're going to find me rocking Home Field Apparel most of the time on game days, on Saturdays in Manhattan. So get stocked up. Go over to homefieldapparel.com. Check it out. They've got 40 K-State items on there, a sweet bomber jacket as well with Pennant Willie on it, a lot of throwback logo retro stuff that you're going to really enjoy. T-shirts, hoodies, soft, comfortable fit. I love homefieldapparel.com, and we'll hook you up with a 15% off if your entire first order with the coupon code or discount code of 3mall23. Again, enter 3mall23, score 15% off your entire first order. We're going to talk a little bit more K-State defense, and we're going to get into the K-State offense when we come back from break here with Curry Sexton.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
All right, so Curry, we've talked about the corners. I got to ask you about Austin Moore. We touched on him a little bit last week, but he blew up a play on a 4th and 1, him and Javon Banks and others early on in that game against Troy. He's now tied for 4th in the country with 5 tackles for loss through 2 games. I think Pro Football Focus ranks him as the 12th best run defender across all positions in college football currently through 2 games. We know how good he was with 87 tackles last year, 10 TFLs. He quite literally is a machine. That is what they nickname him, but it just feels like he is always right where the ball is at and making plays.
Absolutely. I was telling my dad Saturday, I said, his nickname is perfect. I mean, he is around the ball. He maybe finds the ball more as a linebacker than maybe Elijah Lee, but probably more so Arthur Brown over 10 years ago. I mean, Austin has an innate ability to find the football. And I think a lot of it is because of his processing ability. I think he's one of the smartest kids on the field, and I think his instincts are tremendous. And so you see him making plays on almost every snap, it feels like. I mean, if there's a play at the line of scrimmage, who made that tackle? And then you see, okay, it was Austin Moore, no surprise. And so Obviously, he's taken his game to a completely higher, to a much higher level this year, which is impressive after the year he had last year. So just fun to see him doing really good things. Obviously, I think we're waiting on Daniel Green to come into form, maybe to get healthy, and then we should have one of the most dynamic linebacking cores in the Big 12 and if not the country.
PFF actually had Austin Moore in week 1 after the SEMO game as the best graded Power 5 linebacker in college football, and how he played in that game with 3 tackles for loss. So Austin Moore is just a tremendous football player. You mentioned Daniel Green. I think he didn't have a tackle against SEMO, and I think he had 3 or 4 in the game against Troy. Do you think it's just a matter of him getting back up to speed after being banged up? Do you think he looks maybe a step slow and is just getting back into shape and form out there?
Yeah, I think it's all related to, some of the injuries he dealt with in the preseason. And naturally, that impacts not only your speed and agility, but also your game conditioning. And it takes a while for a guy of his size, for all that to catch up. And so I think we'll see it. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it on Saturday, but obviously he's been in there. I think he played maybe the most or the second most snaps on defense Saturday. So you hope that by Saturday his game conditioning is even better, and that he's kind of finding the Daniel Green of old. Because I think obviously with him, with Austin Moore, and then we've seen some really good things from Desmond Purnell through 2 games. I think you have 3 guys there that are really, really strong players. And then you start mixing in maybe some of those younger guys as well, and they've shown that they have some strong capabilities as well. So really excited about our group at that linebacking position.
Well, Desmond Purnell showed some burst on one of those plays on Saturday when they were trying to trick K-State. The quarterback, Gunnar Watson, was trying to act like couldn't hear the play. They did the Wildcat snap the vital, and Purnell shot out of a cannon and blew that play up and showed some of his awareness out there, but also athleticism. So they have an electric trio of linebackers and then some good quality depth behind them. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the pass rush, Curry. I mean, they're now, I think K-State's number 9 in the country in sacks per game with 4. Again, we're only 2 games into the season, but Khalid Duke looks every bit the part of what K-State could have hoped for coming in to replace Felix Anudike-Uzomah, sliding down to his natural pass rushing position. Him, and Brendan Mott. I mean, I mentioned earlier, he graded as their second best pass rusher. He put Watson, their quarterback, on his back several times in the game. He might not have gotten home to get the sack a few of those times, but he felt that. And Gunnar Watson, as a result, he goes 2 of 8 in the second half for 9 yards passing. And then they lifted him in the fourth quarter. But K-State's pass rushing, I mean, they are getting after it. And what do you make of the guys coming off the edge?
Yeah, I've been incredibly impressed. I think on our first show prior to the SEMO game, and maybe on some other stuff that I did prior to the season, people are always saying, what are your concerns, or what do you want to see from certain groups on the field? And I think naturally, when you lose a first round draft pick and then also lose a guy on the inside who's been around forever, and Eli Huggins, I think it's natural to show some, and have a little bit of concern about, what's replacing those guys, what's replacing that leadership and that production. And obviously we've seen Khalid, we've seen Brendan, and we've seen Nate do it at differing levels and at different times. But for the 3 of them to now through 2 games have gone out there and just been incredibly impressive, both games, assures me that we are just fine at that position. I think Khalid Duke he has to be one of the most explosive pass rushers in college football. He's not Felix Anudike. He's not necessarily a 3-down physical defensive end run stopper pass rusher. He is just a speed guy. I mean, kind of like a young Von Miller. I mean, the college version of a young Von Miller. The way that he attacks offensive tackles in maneuvers around them is unbelievable. I mean, both last week and this week, when he's getting in the quarterback's lap and making sacks, in both games he's done it in a way that you feel like he goes unblocked. And then you look at the replay, and no, there is a left tackle or a right tackle trying to block him, and he is just so explosive that they almost didn't lay a finger on him. And I think that's the most impressive thing about him. He is going to terrorize offenses all year. I mean, there not many offensive tackles are going to see many guys like him. And so he's going to be something that is going to be a game plan nightmare for offenses. And I think Brendan Mott and Nate Matlack have been very, very impressive as well. I mean, those are two big, long guys with some talent and with high motors. And we've seen that they're, just like Khalid, they're going to be in the backfield. They're going to be disrupting plays. And so I think to have those three guys and their big play capability is huge for our defense. And then you start mixing in, somebody like Cody Stufflebean and then Toby as well. And really there's some strong depth there. And I think, we've seen some flashes that maybe Toby O is a little bit like Khalid Duke was when Khalid was a younger cat. The explosiveness is there. And so it's really exciting to see some of the different, pass rush options that we have.
Well, I think Khalid's first sack, or it might have been his second sack on Saturday, actually came where they lined Toby and him on the same side, and they had him run a stunt, and they stunted Toby down in. Khalid burst around the outside on the perimeter and got the sack, which was a really nice run stunt. Toby did his job. He obviously had the strip sack with 30 seconds left in the game, showed some of his burst and athleticism and power. I mean, Toby has a bright future as well, and it might be in that Khalid Duke role. And look, it's so hard to block Duke because, like you just said, Curry, the spin move he showed in week 1 against SEMO to go on the inside, and then he's got that speed rush to the outer per edge, and his hands are so good to just shed the block. He is hard to defend. He's a guy that was a wide receiver coming out of high school, which, with that length, and then move him down to DN. Man, it is fun to think about that pass rush going forward. Just a couple other defensive numbers we'll throw out, and then we'll touch base on the offense here. But, I mentioned earlier, Gunnar Watson, 2 of 8 with 9 yards passing in the second half. Troy went 0 of 7 on third downs in the second half after going 6 of 10 in the first half. And this kind of blew me away when I ran the numbers, Curry. First 4 drives of the second half, Troy, when it was a 21-10 game, Troy had 12 plays where they gained 1 yard of offense. So they went 3 and out each of their first 4 drives, gained a total of 1 yard of offense. On their first 6 drives, the second half, they had 62 yards of offense. And if you actually look at the overall numbers, they ran 66 plays in the game, and 42 of them went for 3 yards or less. 28 of 66 plays didn't gain a yard. 42% of their plays didn't gain a yard. 16 of them were obviously incompletions, but a lot of negative run plays. They bottle up Vital, who's a talented running back. And once again, I mean, this run defense is really showing some things. I did not expect them to be in this position. So,
yeah.
Unbelievable.
I mean, other than Vital's one big run, I mean, his yards per were minuscule. And other than the 2 one-handed catches, I mean, that offense would have had no production had it not. I mean, had the one big one-handed catch up on the K-State sideline on 3rd and long, and then the touchdown catch, where Will Lee had the guy blanketed. I think, if those 2 plays, take away those 2 plays in Vital's long run, and those numbers are even more staggering. So just an impressive job by the defense, and the second half numbers show what how good Klanderman is in game, at making adjustments and making those on the fly.
I felt like I underestimated early on in that game Troy's skill guys because I was not expecting those dudes to go up and make one-handed grabs. But Chris Lewis is actually a 6'4" wide receiver sophomore who was a transfer from Kentucky, and 24/7 had him as a 4-star wide receiver in the 2021 or 22 recruiting class. And I did not realize that. Like, they lost their 2 receivers. One transferred to Oregon. Their top guy had 863 yards last year, Tez Johnson, and their other went on and graduated. So I didn't expect those guys to come in and make some of those plays that they did. Credit to them. They stepped up. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they bottled up Vital. In fact, if you look at like the overall rushing numbers, that includes sacks. You take away Vital's 46-yard run, and that Troy offense ran for 24 yards on 27 carries. So now, again, that includes the negated yards from sacks, but just a tremendous job by that K-State defense. And in the second half, Troy had 28 plays, only 3 went for 10 yards or more. So an amazing defensive effort. We're going to talk about K-State offense, but first we're going to throw to a second break. Before we do that, we got to talk to you about our friends at DraftKings. Football's back in full swing with another week of epic games, and who's got you covered on the action for every single one of them? DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. New customers can bet $5 on football and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Nobody's missing out on the action this season. All DraftKings customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game this September. Get in on the NFL Week 2 action with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app now and use the code KCSN to sign up. New customers can bet just $5 and take home $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code KCSN. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus age, varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football. Terms for eligibility, terms and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
All right, we're back with Curry Sexton, former Kansas State wide receiver and partner at Wildcat NIL. Curry, the one thing we haven't talked about really yet is the offense. And that was a Troy defense. Their calling card was the defensive side of the football. I mean, they were essentially a top 10 defense in almost every metric last season. Scoring, points per drive, they were 10th in the country last year. Turnovers forced. And they had some guys up front. I mean, they returned their starting nose tackle, who's really a load, 6'3", 317 pounds. They had a couple all first-team Sunbelt guys on the D-line at the DN position. In fact, they returned 3 guys that had 33 tackles for loss and 20 sacks last year. So they have some dudes on that defense. What did you make of K-State's offensive performance? I know there were some frustrating times where K-State couldn't capitalize with some of the field position, especially in that third quarter. But what did you make of the performance by K-State's offense, factoring in that Troy defense?
Yeah, overall, it was impressive. I think there were, through 2 games, we'd maybe like to see a little bit more of a rhythm or more consistency in the run game. And I think, you have to give a lot of credit to that Troy front. I think some of the struggles that we had on Saturday were just in part because we were up against a strong defensive team and a strong defensive front. But, all in all, putting up 45 points against a team like that, 42 points against a team like that is impressive. And, you come out and you have a fast start, which you always love to see, kind of take control of the game. Second quarter, some of those, had some of the same, other than that last drive, had some of those same struggles with capitalizing on field position as we did in the third quarter. And so I think, there's, after that Will Lee interception, there's a chance to really put that ball game away. Go in, take advantage of the short field position and go score and go up 21 I guess it would have been 18 at that point. And so, frustrating for us to throw an interception in that situation and give them an opportunity to come back in the ball game. But what I was really, really pleased to see was that despite that late touchdown by Troy that put them within 4, unlike maybe what we would have seen from K-State teams of old, where we would have hit a knee and went to the locker room, we went down the field and scored 7 points and really we probably took back a lot of that momentum that had been lost. And so, again, I know we can be nitpicky, and that's what happens when you have a good football team is you get nitpicky. But all in all, scoring 42 points against a team like Troy in pretty convincing fashion is impressive nonetheless.
This isn't meant to be any sort of a dig at Bill Snyder. You played for Coach Snyder, and he's one of the greatest coaches to ever do it. But he likely would have taken a knee in that situation or ran out the clock. What does it say when your coach is willing to take those timeouts, be aggressive, not go into the locker room satisfied just being ahead, but especially after Will takes that sack, right? I mean, they were in 2nd and 18. Most coaches, not just Bill Snyder, most coaches in college football would have just ran the clock out at that point. But Coach Kleiman calls a timeout in 2nd and 18, inside their own 30, 35, and they go down and score. What does that say to if you're in that huddle as an offensive unit to them?
I think it just shows what kind of confidence our coaches have in our players. And I'll be honest with you, I was after Will got sacked and put us in that 2nd and 20 situation. I said out loud, I said, why are we calling a timeout here? Just because at that stage there was a possibility that we would give the ball back to Troy. And keep in mind, because we took the ball to start the game, Troy was getting the ball to start the second half. And so, having played for Coach Snyder and having played under a more conservative approach in a lot of those instances, after that sack, I said, what are we doing? And then obviously those, Coach Kleiman and Coach Klein showed me why I'm in the stands, and they're making the important decisions. And so, again, I think it goes to show what kind of confidence they have in both our quarterback and our offense as a whole. And it also shows what kind of big playability our offense has. And so, really impressive after that sack for the offense to get back in there and to make that big play. I mean, and obviously Will was protected well on that long touchdown pass. He did a nice job stepping up into the pocket, and obviously hit Phil in stride. And then Jaden Jackson made a heck of a block on the back end to make that possible. So really, really impressed with the aggressiveness of our coaching staff, because that's not something we've seen in the past. And that play, that long touchdown pass to Phillip Brooks, turned the game on its head.
Talked about how good that Troy defense was. I mean, it's a unit that allowed 3.6 yards per carry. Last year, Curry, that was top 25 in the country. K-State ends the game with 3.9 yards per carry. DJ Giddens and Trayshawn Ward each had 31 yards at half on 6 carries each. So it was north of 4. It was almost 5 yards a carry for each. But in the third quarter, those two combined for 8 rushes for 0 yards. Do you just chalk it up to Troy's defensive line just doing a really nice job? Are there anything that you see or could pinpoint as something to be concerned about up front with K-State's offensive line, or maybe just a slow start to the year?
Yeah, I think I'll chalk it up mostly to a slow start. I mean, obviously we have an offensive line that is still shuffling some parts around, and I think once we get Christian Duffy back, they'll get into more of a rhythm. It'd be nice for guys to settle into one position rather than seeing them bounce around. And so I think part of it is that. Obviously, we lost an all-timer to the NFL and Deuce Vaughn, and what he did for the offense was, I mean, he was the guy for the last 2-3 seasons. And so now trying to transition away from him to now 2 different but really talented running backs is obviously a change. And I think, I think Troy did a really good job, but there were also times, I mean, we were running a lot of those stretch type plays, and there were a lot of times where it was well blocked, but we didn't get the guy at the second level. I can recall one play in the first quarter where the play is very nicely blocked, and I believe it was Taylor Poitier. He gets up to that second level, but just doesn't finish the block. The guy makes the play at the line of scrimmage, and saw a number of instances like that on Saturday. And so I think a lot of that, I mean, obviously these guys are, very, very talented offensive linemen. And so I think the continuity in that rhythm will lead to more success as we go forward. But obviously a lot of factors contributing to maybe this, the slow start for our run game.
Will has a second interception back-to-back weeks. He maybe just made a poor decision with where he threw the football. I saw what he saw initially. It was toward our end where we were sitting. RJ popped open for a brief second, and it's probably a throw that Will needs to throw right on a line if he's going to try and get it in there down the seam. But he sailed it. And I mean, look, Reddy Stewart is arguably the best group of 5 corner in the country. I mean, he's graded out as the number 9 corner according to Pro Football Focus nationally. Just last year, he gets the interception. But anything to be concerned about in your mind with maybe Will forcing things a couple different times? He threw into double coverage a couple different times, and I was just wondering what you thought of that and maybe the decision making.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something. I mean that will improve as Will takes more snaps and as his sort of in-game command improves. I mean, I think we look at Will, and on the roster we see senior next to his name. But what we forget is that he didn't have a true offseason or any sort of preseason in 2020. Came in totally green as a freshman and just thrown into the fire. Similar circumstances in 21, and last year he comes in and plays about half the season after Adrian Martinez's injury and played really, really well. But he still hasn't played. He hasn't played the amount of snaps at the collegiate level than maybe you would think, because he is a 4th-year guy. And so I think just, improving in that decision making improvements in that decision making will come with each snap. And I think it's just understanding that, hey, as badly as you want to throw the ball to Ben Sinnott in coverage because he's a heck of a playmaker, we got to either take it, we either got to take a check down or we got to throw the ball out of bounds and move on on to the next snap because, a 0-yard gain is a heck of a lot better than turning the ball over. And so I think we will see that improve. But right now, I think through 2 games, there is a little bit of a reason to be concerned because we have seen him a time or two see a guy running down the seam and chuck it up. I mean, before the interception on Saturday, Ben Sinnott again running a seam route and Will chucked it up into double coverage, and fortunately he overthrew everybody. And so I think in Colin Klein, it is a guy who in his last 2 seasons as a starting quarterback at K-State took great care of the football. And I know that's something that was impressed upon him by Coach Snyder and Coach Del Miller. And so I have no doubt that Colin and Will get that figured out and he'll start making the right decision.
Had myself muted there as I'm amateur hour, but Will had 15 TDs and 4 interceptions last year, so his numbers were outstanding. And it's not like his numbers are rock solid right now this year. It's really just nitpicking a little bit. And there were a couple balls where there was a chance that they could have been picked off on Saturday. You mentioned, and I get it. Like sometimes there is. You want to just get it to your playmaker to make a play. Like Ben Sinnott in double coverage, he might be able to make a play on a ball like that. So I get it, and I get the temptation to do it. Did you see anything that they did to contain Sinnott? He only was targeted a couple times, had 5 yards in the game. I assume, Curry, but I'm not an expert on this, that they were doubling him or bracketing him a lot of that game. But did you see anything different?
Yeah, absolutely. He was getting bracketed in almost every snap, which is something that he's going to have to deal with. I mean, he is sort of, and we'll see what happens when Keegan Johnson really gets into a groove. But Ben Sinnott is the focal point of our passing game. And so, whether he was lining up in a true tight end spot or whether he was flexed out, he was almost on every snap. He had a slot guy right over him, and then he had a safety over the top, either getting doubled or in most cases it was a true bracket. And I think one thing that Will and Ben will have to learn, I know they're really good buddies. They're obviously key players on this year's team and were key players on last year's team is you got to let the game come to you. I know that Guy went for 5 catches and 100 yards last week and he's getting bottled up early in the game. And it's just natural instinct to say, we got to get him the football. We got to get our playmaker the football. But if Ben Sinnott's getting bracketed or doubled on every snap, there's going to be a lot of one-on-one opportunities for other guys. And so you just have to take what the defense gives you. And I know that will be frustrating for Ben, but it's a part of the game. I know Tyler and I both dealt with that when we were seniors, and you just, you got to let the game come to you. Your opportunities will come. And if they don't, they're going to come for other guys, and that's going to help the team win. And so, Ben was getting double teamed and bracketed a lot. I think he's going to see a lot of that this year.
Well, it's going to become a lot harder to do that if Keegan Johnson shows just the glimpse that we saw from him on 17 snaps in the second half of the game. And honestly, Curry, that was maybe one of my most positive takeaways, was just getting the opportunity. I was worried not seeing him in the first half. It's like, oh, he's in uniform, but he must have just not felt like he could give it a go. He gets out there, and I had my eyes glued to him. And just the burst that he showed, the explosion, and then just elite level hands. He had one where he laid out just a simple 5-yard pass, but it was a tough catch. Man, the first catch he had or second catch for 17 yards, I was on Reddy Stewart, just a great route and almost scores on it, maybe did score. So what did you make of what you saw from Keegan, and just how important is he to the offense and freeing up some of these other guys?
Yeah, he is that. He is that guy. He's that difference maker that we've maybe been missing. And you've seen it over time. I think you look back to 2013 and Tyler Lockett missed a couple games that year, and the offense just completely changes because the defensive game plan completely changes when you don't have that guy out there. And so we've heard that Keegan was going to be that guy. And in glimpses on Saturday, he showed us that he is. And the things that will do for the rest of our offense are sort of unspeakable. You have a guy like him who has the ability to get open at all 3 levels and to put true pressure on a defense, and that's going to do wonders for Phil and RJ in the slot, And also for a guy like Jaden Jackson on the outside, who's shown us some really good things through 2 weeks, and then obviously Ben Sinnott as well. And so I breathed a deep sigh of relief when I saw him in there Saturday and saw him get out there and really look good, because, I think you started to wonder, is this injury more serious than we thought? When is he going to be back? Will he be back for Mizzou? Will he be back for UCF? And I think he showed us enough Saturday that now coming into the Mizzou game, we feel like, okay, this is a guy who can probably go out there and play 50 snaps and probably make an impact on the game.
Yeah, no question at all. I mean, heck, he even had a route where he wasn't targeted that went to Jaden Jackson for 40 yards. I watched him from the snap. He burnt his guy.
He could have scored on that play. He might have scored.
I was mad at Will for not throwing it to him, because I think he probably would have scored. I mean, it was still a dime. I mean, Will threw an absolute, it was a great fingertip catch by Jaden Jackson too. So I'm nitpicking again, but yeah, that showed a lot of flashes there with Keegan and this offense. And yeah, I feel bad we didn't even hardly touch about Phillip Brooks, who had a great game, 7 catches for 94 yards. Jaden Jackson graded out actually as K-State's #1 receiver according to PFF. And maybe the blessing in disguise is with Keegan missing some of those snaps, you got extra reps for a guy like Jaden, and you might have uncovered a 4th weapon at the wide receiver position moving forward. Curry, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. You and me are both going to Columbia on Saturday. Big game. Things crank up another level now. It only gets harder. Missouri, I mean, you're a Kansas kid, and I think you were a redshirt freshman last time they played. It was 2011. K-State won that game.
I was a freshman and actually got to play that day. But yeah, that was last time we played them. So.
What does it mean to you? I mean, does it take on any added incentive being a bordering state and you consider Missouri a big rival?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, in K-State's good years, Missouri was almost always down. And so, there wasn't, in the 90s and early 2000s, it seemed like we always kind of took care of them. And then obviously in 2011, we took care of them with relative ease. And so I know that there is that rivalry component. I guess I haven't ever felt it as much, at least in maybe comparison to KU. But I will say that, they're an SEC team. And nowadays with conference realignment and with, some of just the natural, bantering that goes on back and forth between these conferences, I think there's a lot of motivation that comes from the fact that we're playing an SEC team, and we're playing them in their house, and they haven't sold out a football game since 2019, and all of a sudden the Cats are coming to town and they've sold out Faurot Field or Faurot Field, however you pronounce it. And so I think there's a lot of motivation there from just inherently based on the matchup itself. And then I think, you throw into the mix that there's not been any shortage of publicities from Columbia or Mizzou-based outlets that haven't made it sound like this is their Super Bowl. They feel like this game is going to dictate their season. If they lose, they probably go 5-7, 6-6. If they win, they think that they can achieve, they can hit greater heights under Eli Drinkwitz than maybe they have before. At the end of the day, this is a football team that if we play like we're supposed to, we should be able to take care of. And so I think for me, it's just about, for the Cats, it's just about going there and taking care of business, just like we did on Saturday against Troy.
Is there a matchup you're particularly going to have your eye on? I don't know how much you've had a chance to watch Missouri. They've got a decent defense. They got some dudes over on that side of the ball. Brady Cook at quarterback. His numbers look okay, but I think it's a lot of shorter stuff that they're doing. Burden's an explosive receiver, but they struggled immensely against Middle Tennessee, which we made some jabs about it being their Super Bowl next week, so they were looking ahead on our pod earlier with John and DY Curry. But any matchups in particular that stand out to you in this game?
Yeah, I think the easy one is Luther Burden, and then Will Lee or Jacob Parrish. I mean, Luther Burden is a special talent at that receiver position. I think last week went over 100 yards for the first time in his college career. Obviously, a guy that is sort of coming into his own, and so really, this is going to be a big test for Will and Jacob. They've shown us a lot so far, but I don't think they've gone against a Luther Burden so far. And then I think another one is sort of our interior offensive line against their interior defensive line. They have a couple of really good players up front whose names I can't remember, but that that's going to be an important part of this. this game is our offensive line's ability to control the line of scrimmage. And then I guess, in addition to Luther Burden, I mean, they have other good weapons out there as well. I mean, Theo Weiss is a guy who made a lot of plays at the University of Oklahoma over the years. And so there's a talent level there. I don't know if Brady Cook is the answer for them. I know a lot of their fans want to see Sam Horn, and we may see Sam Horn on Saturday. But again, I think this is a team. I mean, they snuck by a Middle Tennessee State team who got beat by Bama by 100 in week 1. And so this is a similar team to the team we took care of with relative ease last year in Manhattan. And so I think the important thing, and I know Coach Kleiman and his staff do an unbelievable job of preparing our guys, but love the fact that it's an 11 a.m. kick and the guys just have to, head to Columbia, and it's a business trip. You go win the game, you fly back, and you can have a night out in Manhattan Saturday night.
Yeah, and I'll be able to actually watch 6 o'clock games that evening at peace with hopefully a win under the belt and not have to worry about the anxiety of a night kick. That always, you just kind of sit around nervous all day, and I'm sure you do as a player as well. That can't be fun. I'm sure it's fun playing under the lights, but I kind of would prefer as a fan just to get it out of the way. And you mentioned the interior line. Darius Robinson, 6'5", 300-pound D tackle. He's actually, so Mel Kiper today, the NFL draft analyst for ESPN, lists that as one of his 3 matchups across college football to watch this week is Cooper Beebe against Darius Robinson, who's an experienced veteran guy up front for Mizzou. So they're going to test the K-State offensive line a little bit, but it's a veteran group, and if they can get Christian Duffy back, that'll be a big lift. Hopefully there's not a lot of rust there, and he's sharp, and they figure things out up front, and if they do, I think K-State will be okay in this game. Curry, I kept you far too long, but there was so much to talk about with some of the exciting things going on. We didn't talk as much NIL in this episode, but for our listeners, they need to get on out over to catsnil.com. Check out Wildcat NIL. There's a membership tier program that you guys have launched over there. You guys got something for everybody, at $10 for the lower tier, $25, as it sounds like sirens are going right by my house right now. $25 for that second tier, $50 for the third tier, and then $90 a month for that fourth tier. And as you go up a tier in each one, you get even more access and perks. So encourage everybody to get on over to catsnil.com. Check it out. Also, the store you guys got there, the Kansas State beef hats. You guys are doing great work and a lot of good causes. Everything is going, like, money is not only going to K-State athletes and benefiting them, but like with the Kansas State beef hats and everything going on there, like we've said before, every hat bought, a pound of Kansas raised beef goes to a local food bank, which is a great thing. You guys are contributing to the Boys and Girls Clubs, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and so many other things. So cannot encourage all of you fans to get out there and help support Curry and the great group of K-Staters. A lot of former K-State football players you guys got over there, Curry. So anything you want to add that I might have missed?
No, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, obviously we're in a different state in college athletics, and NIL is an important factor, and will continue to be an important factor to the success of our programs. And so obviously would welcome, any support, whether it, through our store, through our membership platform, through, individual donations, whatever that may be. It all matters, and it all makes a difference.
Well, I know a few of my friends have started contributing to Wildcat NIL as well. They heard it talked about on the show, so I hope more of you all get engaged and help support what we see. They're putting in tons of work, these guys do, and they deserve it. They're earning it out there. So get on over to catsnil.com. Curry, appreciate you so much. Maybe we'll run into each other in Columbia and have a celebratory drink or something after the game, hopefully. And then get back home safely, but have a safe trip out to Columbia. Appreciate you once again jumping on in our weekly show with Curry Sexton, former K-State wide receiver and partner at Wildcat NIL. For Nick Springer behind the scenes producing this, thank you for listening to another episode of 3 Maw.